All right. Welcome back, fellow football fanatics. It's your host, College Football with Sam, and today we have JTSports live with us. I've been on his channel several times, and he's been a great host, so today we are doing the honor of hosting him. How are you doing, JT?
Man, I'm doing great today. Always excited to talk college football with you, Sam. How about yourself? You're a Michigan fan. Y'all got a lot going on down there in Ann Arbor.
Yeah, it's not good whatsoever. I am not I'm not happy with all of that stuff. The cheating allegations, and it's very likely that Michigan will face some kind of penalty. Before we get into any of the show further, I was, tinkering around with a lot of stuff in my streaming system. Can everyone hear JT Sports and I? Let me know in the chat if you can or can't. And also make sure to check out his channel. You can find so in the description and also in the title of this live stream. You can click on at JT Sports. Can everyone let me know if they can hear everything correctly? From what I can tell and from what my systems tell me, it's all good. I'm doing pretty good right now. I'm a little tired, but it is what it is. Okay, Chris hears everything well. Thank you very much, Chris Lane. Chris Lane is a Patreon member of ours, and he's a phenomenal Ohio State fan. Okay, we'll be answering questions in the chat periodically, but first and foremost, let's talk about this week, week 10. What are some of your brief thoughts before we get into all of these into all these different games and your picks?
In terms of you gotta give me a conference team.
I mean, we're 8 games in. In the case of Notre Dame and USC, we're 9 games in. We're going to talk about the college football playoff later on the show and our predictions for who's going to make it, who's the national champion, etc. This week, there's a lot of different matchups like, LSU Alabama, for example. This is November, the time where the fake, the faux, is exposed. If someone has a dirty diaper, it's out in the wide open. If there's a diamond in the rough, well, the rough and, the stone is chiseled out and the beautiful diamond is showed. Who do you think are some teams that are going to rise either this week or this month to the occasion? And some teams who you look at and you just kind of get grossed out. You think there might be something wrong with them.
You definitely look at Ole Miss. Ole Miss right now is a college football dark horse that nobody's talking about, and they're hosting Texas A&M at home. They're only a 3-point favorite in that game. And next week, they go on the road to Athens, Georgia to play the Bulldogs in a game that they got a really good chance at being able to win if their offense can keep up the level of play that they've displayed up to this point this season. Their only loss came against Alabama, where they lost 24-10. That was their worst performance offensively all year. They got a nice win against Tulane. Let's not forget they beat LSU also. If they can survive Texas A&M tomorrow and they head into that Georgia game 8-1 and Georgia also remains unbeaten, there's a good chance that Ole Miss possibly could sneak their way into the college football playoffs if Alabama has a little bit of a mishap, because Alabama's still undefeated in SEC play. Oregon, I think they're the scariest team in college football right now. They lost to Washington, but I don't think they lost to Washington because Washington was the better team. It's just that Oregon had a bunch of aggressive fourth down calls that didn't go their way and questionable play calling to go along with it. Before halftime, instead of opting to take the 3 points, they decided to go for the touchdown. And that's cool if you're playing NCAA 14 or Madden, but in real life situation, Dan Lanning has to take the points.
Yeah.
USC, I think they're going to fuck up somebody's season. Like, we get it. Alex Grinch has a priority defense, okay, but let's not act like you need a great defense to be able to pull off upsets. You got Caleb Williams. You're going up against a Washington team that doesn't have a consistent pass rushing. I'm never going to count out Caleb Williams. There's been a lot of things said about Caleb Williams that, in my opinion, are just fairly untrue. Like, he's not overrated. You take Caleb Williams off this year's USC team, and they definitely have more than 2 losses. Their offensive line hasn't been great. They got talent at wide receiver. They got talent on defense. They just don't execute. But the thing that their defense does well is that they are really good at forcing takeaways.
Yeah.
And I definitely think FSU could get tested against Miami next week. It's a rivalry game. You always have to be on the lookout for those. And then Michigan is about to start getting tested as well next week also. So, those are just some interesting thoughts I have. My last one is Oklahoma. Oklahoma's playoff hopes are on the line against Oklahoma State in the last Bedlam rivalry game that we're going to see. Oklahoma State is a team that's starting to get really hot right now, and you don't really want to play them. They got a really good running back in Ali Gordon or Ali Gordman. That's their star running back. Their offense runs through him. They got some solid receivers. Look out for that Oklahoma State game.
We'll get into that a little later, but I guess I'll give like a spoiler alert. I think Oklahoma State's going to win. What does the chat think about this week? And we'll answer your comments periodically in the chat. Let me know some of your predictions for these games as we go through them. And in due time, also let us know your college football playoff predictions, and we'll try and interact with you all. Dion Pryor says, if we die, we die. Go Big Red. Nebraska, intriguingly enough, is only a 3-point favorite over Michigan State on the road. Michigan State's pretty awful. I think I'm going to try and get a video out on that tonight. But I think that's going to be a very easy Nebraska cover on that play. But let's talk about these games right here. So first and foremost, we have Ohio State, number 1 team in the country according to the college football playoff rankings. They're 8-0, 5-0. They're traveling to Rutgers. Rutgers being a 6-2 team. They're 3-2 in the Big Ten. Ohio State's an 18.5-point favorite. And I know that Ohio State is, much more talented, but there's rumors that they might have a quarterback injury. You might see some Tristan Gebbia, which I never thought I would say, but that might be the case, given that Kyle McCord had, got hurt against Wisconsin. And Rutgers has been very scrappy running the football. They have a great defense, though Ohio State has an elite defense. What do you think here, looking at this?
With Rutgers, I don't like them in this game because you can't throw the football. And there's no way you can pull off an upset just by running the style of offense they've ran. Gavin Wimsatt, he's been a really good athlete, and that rushing attack has been really deadly. But against Ohio State, you just can't be a one-trick pony. Let's be honest. Rutgers isn't going to out-physical Ohio State. This has been the most physical Ohio State team we've seen, not just under Ryan Day, but in years. I've never thought of Ohio State as being a team that just would physically beat you up on front the way they do. I just don't think Rutgers is going to be able to hang with them. Their defense is okay. I don't know how they're going to defend against that Ohio State passing attack, even with Kyle McCord being a little bit inconsistent and having some nagging injuries there. It's not that hard what the game plan is for Ohio State. I think they got Travion Henderson coming back. You got Maserati Marv. Just give the ball to Maserati. You feel me? You got a Maserati. You got to drive that thing. You just can't have it sitting in the garage looking all pretty and cute. Like, you got to use that thing. And that's something that Ohio State hasn't been afraid to do. Anytime they get in the bind, they go straight to them. I think Rutgers probably is going to get rolled in this game.
Interesting. I think in my preview and prediction video, I picked Ohio State to win. My subscribers can remind me if this is correct. I think 27-14 was my prediction for Ohio State beating Rutgers. I think that Rutgers will cover because I think that they're one of the they're surprisingly one of the more efficient teams in the Big Ten in running the football. I mean, Kyle Monungai he's going to break 1,000 yards this season, and he already has 7 rushing touchdowns. I think Ohio State's going to win, but if Rutgers is able to control, the ball and run it, and they're able to stop an Ohio State run game that's been very suspect with maybe just, a four-man front, that could be a very close, slow game. But I'm in agreement that Ohio State's going to win. I don't think Rutgers has the talent necessary to pull off this upset. Kansas State traveling to Texas. Texas, they're going to obviously be starting Malik Murphy since Quinn Ewers is sadly injured. Kansas State right now has Avery Johnson and Will Howard splitting time at quarterback, and they look like one of the most efficient teams in the country despite losing to Oklahoma State and Missouri, who are both ranked teams, by the way. So what do you think about this? I mean, Texas is at home, and they're a 3.5 point favorite at home against a team who they have that much more 4 stars and 5 stars than, and they're also ranked, almost 16 spots ahead of Texas, or ahead of Kansas State.
Kansas State, Sam, is probably one of the most complete teams in college football. They're not a one-trick pony. They are balanced on offense. They can beat you through the air. Yeah, they got a two quarterback system, but it's more so the Will Howard show. Avery Johnson, he comes in here and there, but Will Howard has been the better quarterback. Avery Johnson more so is there for, rushing the ball, gadget plays, things like that. Think about Jordan Travis's first 2 years at Florida State. That's what Avery Johnson is. Will Howard, he's been really consistent this year. He had one bad game. I believe that was against Oklahoma State, where he threw 3 interceptions, and that was pretty much it. Their offensive line is amongst the best in college football. They got a really good defense. They can get after your quarterback. They got a really good group of pass rushers there. This is a team that's playing some of their best football. They got counted out really early in the season, but this is the time of the year where if you're a team like Texas, you're trying to survive despite not having Quinn Ewers, and I definitely think they can do that. Texas isn't a team that their whole schedule is built around them beating Bama. Like, let's not forget, they blew out Kansas, and Kansas just upset Oklahoma last weekend. They beat Kansas 40-14. And also, they handled a pretty middle-of-the-pack BYU team. Not bad, but that was a game that people also had a little bit of a suspicion. Maybe it could be an upset. It's hard to beat Texas with the way they're playing at home. Malik Murphy, he looked pretty good. The thing with Kansas is is Will Howard going to be dependable in late game situations? Because Texas has a really good defense. Their defense is criminally underrated. Nobody talks about how good Texas has been on the defense side of the football. I like Texas to win. I like them to cover. Kansas State, they're a really good team, but Texas is a great team. And I have them in my college football playoffs this year. And even with Quinn Ewers being injured, it's like, I don't think the drop-off between him and Malik Murphy is really huge, and that's going to be a hot take to some people, but Quinn Ewers has been kind of up and down at times. Malik Murphy, he had a pretty good display last week against BYU. Yeah, he did have an interception, but for the most part, they were able to play a complementary style of football. Kansas State, they do got a really good offensive line, and when you got a good offensive line, that allows you to do anything. They got really good running backs. Will Howard also is an impactor on the ground too, and Avery Johnson. But I like Texas to pull it out by at least a touchdown.
Here's a hot take, or I don't know if I'd call it a hot take. I think it'd just be a bold prediction because depending on the result, this could be true. I think even if Texas had Ewers, the way this Kansas State team is playing and just how Texas has looked slow. Like they whether it's Wyoming, whether even against Kansas. Kansas's defense is the definition of suspect, and it took them basically running up and down the field to eventually break that defense, and they settled for tons of field goals. I think Kansas State's efficiency is going to allow them to take this one home, and I think even if Texas had Ewers, the way that Kansas State's playing is they've revived
Let me,
themselves.
let me ask you this.
Yes.
What's a good team that Kansas State has beaten on the road this year? Because yes, they've looked really dominant at home, but they lost two of their games, two of their losses on the road. They lost to Missouri, they lost to Oklahoma State. Their best road win right now up to this point is Texas Tech.
That's true.
Elite teams are able to defend home, and that's something that Texas has done a really good job at doing. Again, the majority of upsets that have occurred this year have been when you got a team that's a favorite going on the road.
Yeah. Oh yeah. But I look at this and I kind of get the feeling of like, in retrospect of what happened between Ohio State and Oregon in 2021, I just think there's something to Kansas State, especially when you like consider that run game that they have. But I'm not necessarily very confident on this pick either. I'm much more confident in, talking about Ohio State, Rutgers, or the Pac-12. We'll get to Texas A&M, but before that, I want to answer some things in the chat because this is getting very active. Dr. Foul Cheese Virus. That's a intriguing nickname to say the least. Man, I'm glad this stream is up. I can't handle listening to the guys on the show. I don't know what the Monty show is, who just whine and cry about everything. Thank you for complimenting the show. Glad to have you on. A lot of people are talking about the Michigan scandal. Let's address that after Week 10 picks. Do you think that's a good idea, JT Sports?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Oh yeah, we can definitely talk about that.
Oh, JT Sports is going to probably roast my program to the ends of the earth, but we'll get to that. Justin Roge says number 1 Michigan, number 2 Georgia, number 3 Florida State, number 4 Oregon. We will get to our college football playoff picks and predictions toward the end of the video, but thank you for sharing very much. Justin is a longtime subscriber on this channel. Really much I appreciate you being on here. A lot of people... Okay, Dion Pryor asked about Kansas. They're a ranked team. We'll get to picking them. Okay. Thank you, chat, very much. There were also people talking about their predictions. Music for Me 007 thinks that Ohio State's going to beat Rutgers 30-10, and Moose thinks that Ohio State's going to win 21-14. That's a very, very close game. All right, Texas A&M at Ole Miss. I think you and I both know where we stand on this, and I assume it's common ground. Ole Miss is favored by 3. A&M, they have Max Johnson. They don't have Connor Weekman. And, I mean, take it away. I imagine that we're on the same page with this one.
It's like I'm going with Ole Miss, but I'm not super confident about this one. Texas A&M is a team that has talent, okay? And you can never count on the team that has the kind of blue chip talent that Texas A&M has. And they've been competitive against some of the best teams in the SEC. They nearly beat Tennessee. They nearly beat Alabama. So it's not like they've been getting blown out. Meanwhile, Ole Miss, do they have a defense that you really trust to be able to slow down Texas A&M's offense? Even with Max Johnson, it's not like Max Johnson is a scrub. Like Connor Wickman is better, but Max Johnson is pretty solid if that's who your backup option is. And you can beat the Ole Miss defense with this kind of quarterback. Like, listen, when Ole Miss beat LSU, Sam, like Lane Kiffin, when his defense was on the field and they had to seal the game, I've never saw Lane Kiffin so stressed the hell out. Like, he was sweating over there. He had his hands on his knees. You know what your coaches tell you about having your hands on your knees? Like, you're not supposed to show no weakness. And Lane Kiffin, he was over there stressing. But when his defense got the big stop, it was a breath of fresh air for him. But going against this really good Texas A&M offense, like Bart Petrino definitely has turned this thing around. Ole Miss doesn't have the defense that A&M has. But at the same time, Jackson Dart has been playing some really good football. And the problem with Max Johnson is that he'll make a couple of boneheaded decisions that'll cost them. I'm going with Ole Miss, but I'm not going to say I'm super confident that it's a lock that they're going to win this game, even with them playing at home.
I
And plus, they
understand
got
that.
Georgia next week. Could be a look-ahead game.
In the preseason, I picked A&M to beat Ole Miss for that exact reason. I thought Ole Miss in the preseason would overlook A&M for Georgia, and especially with Ole Miss, only having that one loss, knowing they can, reach bigger and better things, the college football playoff, if they do win out, that's a possibility. There's a chance of that. However, I don't trust Jimbo Fisher. Like that Alabama game, you should have won. You should have won that game if you're Jimbo Fisher. You had no business losing to that Alabama team with the talent you have assembled and with the opportunities you had. I watched that game. That, for an Aggie fan, must have been hell on earth. I'm going with Ole Miss because of two words: Jimbo Fisher. Notre Dame Clemson. Only Notre Dame -3 on the road against a 4-4 Clemson that has honestly looked like how you would expect Rutgers teams of the past 2 years to look. Clemson is top 5 in red zone trips, and they're outside of the top 100 in red zone scoring. Imagine being that ineffective. What do you think?
The thing with Clemson is that when they've played at home, they showed a lot of fight. A lot of their worst performances have come on the road. They got outclassed by Duke on the road. They lost to Miami on the road. They lost to NC State on the road. But they played their best game of the season and they lost to Florida State at home in a game that me and you both agree with, that if FSU doesn't miss that damn field goal, we're having a different conversation about them right now. And Notre Dame is a solid team, but Notre Dame, they're not a flawless team. Offensively, I think that Sam Hartman, he started to cool off a little bit. And let's not forget, they lost to Louisville by 13 points. Clemson is one of those teams that you can't overlook because Dabo Swinney isn't going to give up on the season. Like, the dude was really pissed off with a caller that called into his radio show, like, questioned his salary, criticized the way the program is. And he's one of those coaches that he's always going to have his team ready to play. His team isn't going to quit on him. I like Clemson with the upset.
Listen, I think Texas A&M is one of the best 3-loss teams in the country, and especially when they get it going. This defensive line is one of the best in the country.
Yeah. Tim Tebow interrupted our show. That was my bad. That's funny. I personally, looking at all of this, and that's what I hate about ESPN is all those stupid ads. What this game depends on, I think, in part, and I wonder if you agree with me on this, is which version of Marcus Freeman shows up. Is it the guy who tore apart USC and got in Caleb Williams' head, or is it the head coach who didn't realize his defense only had 10 men on the field in a goal line stand? If one shows up, Notre Dame could dominate. If the other shows up, Clemson might pull off their best game of the year or take advantage of several stupid errors. What do you think that's a good assessment? Or do you think it doesn't matter?
I could see that. Dabo Swinney definitely does have the coaching advantage on his side. I will say he still is the better coach than Marcus Freeman. He lost to the upset master on the road. And a lot of these upsets that occur in college football nowadays occur where you have a team like Notre Dame that's a favorite going on the road against a team like Clemson that's an underdog at home. And that's why I kind of like Clemson. It's still not easy to win in Death Valley. FSU went into there and it was a dogfight. It was a knockout, drag-out brawl, and Clemson was a missed field goal away from pulling that one off. And the thing with Notre Dame is that they nearly lost to Duke. Okay, they nearly beat Ohio State. It's like their offense is hit or miss at times, and Clemson's defense is still good enough to keep you in the game. It's not like NC State was going up and down the field on Clemson's defense. Clemson's offense is the problem, and their offense is a problem because they don't got a lot of talented playmakers at wide receiver. You remember when they used to have Mike Williams, Sammy Watkins, DeAndre Hopkins. They were wide receiver U at one point. Well, ever since Justin Ross, They haven't had no dynamic talent on the outside there. I mean, they got some talented recruits that come in there, but they're not doing a good job at developing those guys. Against Notre Dame, though, this is the kind of team that styles make fights, as they say. And Notre Dame isn't an offense that's going to light you up for 30, 40. Even against USC, a handful of those points came because of the defense and special teams. I like Clemson to win this game, and I'm pretty confident about it. You know, like Dabo Swinney is one of those coaches that he always is going to have his team riled up, and he definitely is going to have Clemson ready for this game. I like the upset with Clemson.
You know, you changed my mind. I originally was going to say that Notre Dame was going to win in a dominant way. I'm going to take Notre Dame to win, but no action on the spread. They'll win by a field goal because their special teams are better. Okay, UConn, Tennessee, you know, one-word answer, you think, I mean, Tennessee win, I have to assume. Okay, yeah. Arizona State at Utah. What do you think about that performance in a few words?
Still confident with Utah because Utah has the best defense in the Pac-12. And although their offense sucks worded through a garden hose, they've shown the ability to blow out bottom feeder teams. They blew out Cal. The same Cal team, by the way, that damn near hung 50 on USC, just decided to get a little bit too aggressive. They held UCLA to 7 points. Okay, like the only offense that really shredded Utah was USC and Oregon. Yeah. Arizona State, they're just so... They don't have a lot of talent, and it's so bad to the point where Kenny Dillingham had to go to a post-game press conference, I think after they nearly beat Washington, and say, hey, like, if you're 300-plus pounds walking around campus, come try out for the football team because we need people and some big boys up front to fill out our field goal protection team.
Wow. Wow. I'm in full agreement. With you. Utah. I don't know about the points, though. I'm not going to make a pick on the points because Arizona State has just this knack of playing people close but not being able to finish. Army at Air Force, you know, I assume...
I like Air Force.
Yeah.
Air Force is really good.
I'd pick Army to cover just by virtue of Air Force with that triple option, you know, plays teams close, likes to wear down, you know, opponents and control clock. Now, this is a game that we've been waiting to talk about. Missouri at Georgia. Before we do that, I want to answer questions in the chat, but think about, along with, you know, I'm going to be thinking about this too, what your thoughts are and analysis on this game. I know that Moose said he likes Ole Miss. I totally agree with you. Much of the chat's talking about the Michigan scandal and some rumors going around there. Dr. Foul Cheese says that Notre Dame's going to win by 3 scores. I could see that happening if Clemson's offense does absolutely nothing. Tennessee's playing a high school team, says Moose. And then he also says that he's picking Air Force, Georgia, and Florida State to all win. Those are just some answers in the chat. Dion Pryor makes a good point. Seems like Big Ten teams need to behave and stop being naughty. Yeah, with Michigan State, Northwestern, and Michigan, Big Ten, what are you doing? Like, seriously, what are you doing? And then, I mean, people always talk about the SEC like there's some, like, group of just criminals, which, I mean, I'm not naive when it comes to college football, but at least the SEC doesn't necessarily pretend like they're above it all. And I'm sorry, but Georgia and their players, you know, getting into, like, racing accidents, I don't know if that has as much to do with the coaching staff as it does, let's say, what's going on with Michigan or going on with Northwestern. Just as some examples. So, yeah, the Big Ten has to pony up their act. But going back to Missouri and Georgia, Georgia is a team who has kind of, I mean, they've been pretty back and forth. You know, like you told me in the pre-live show when we were talking about this. Vanderbilt, you know, getting on Georgia's secondary and torching them at times. And then they just completely shut down Florida and blow out Kentucky, and they also trail to South Carolina at halftime. Missouri's been this great offense, and they have a good run game. They have Luther Burden at wide receiver, Brady Cook's a top 25 quarterback. Their only loss is to LSU, who I think might have the best offense in all of college football right now. What are your thoughts here?
I like Missouri. They got a really good coaching staff. They got a really good offense. Don't really know how their defense is going to fare in this game. Like, they have shown the ability, Missouri, to beat teams that they should beat, and pretty handily too, by the way. Like, they beat South Carolina by double digits. They beat Kentucky by double digits also. That game wasn't really that close. The LSU game, LSU's offense definitely went ham on them. But the thing is, if you can't slow down LSU's offense, you're going to have a difficult time doing the same thing against Georgia. Even without Brock Bowers, like, Georgia still has guys going crazy. Last week against Florida, you had Ra Thomas, you had Dominic Lovett transfer from Missouri. They still got more than enough firepower to put up points on Missouri's defense. This is going to be a game where Missouri is going to have to win a turnover battle. And plus, they're playing on the road. And I know people are quick to, hop on the bandwagon for underdogs. This game has a similar feel to what the Tennessee game had last year.
Bingo.
Tennessee had a lot of momentum. They had a lot of hype. They were a cool story to get behind. But the thing about playing Georgia on the road is if you don't start out well in the first quarter, like, it's wraps. Like, Tennessee, like, they just got too rattled by the home crowd. Missouri with Luther Burden, he's going to have a pretty good game. I think the offense could put up some points. Georgia isn't the same team defensively that they have been in previous years. And any Georgia fan that pushbacks on that is just, delusional and naive. You had two historically great defenses. You don't have Jalen Carter walking through that door anymore. You don't have a Jordan Davis on your defensive line this year. So it's like, for Georgia, I expect them to win. I don't know if they'll cover. I'll kind of leave that alone, because this kind of is the game that maybe it could go a little bit of a different way depending on how Missouri plays. If their offense can come out and have consistency, I still like Georgia to get the win. They're playing at home. They haven't lost to an SEC team in the regular season in damn near 2 years.
Yeah. I like Georgia to win. I like Georgia to cover. Georgia isn't as good as they were the previous 2 seasons. I think that's pretty obvious. But Missouri isn't as good as last year Tennessee either. They don't have that same, deadly, trio or trio, however you say it, of wide receivers. And I don't think they have the same offensive line necessarily. More importantly, this would be heresy if I left it out. They don't have the same quarterback. Brady Cook is not Hendon Hooker. I think that Georgia will win by something like 42, say 42-24. Or something like that. On the chat, someone talked about you got a West Virginia BYU prediction. I would say, gosh, yeah, I would instinctively go with West Virginia there. I think they're like, West Virginia is like this scrappy, physically tough
but so is BYU.
That's true. I also think Garrett Green is better than Keaton Slovis. If this is a home game for West Virginia, I'd say it's West Virginia. They're one of the teams I got wrong. Like, I was way off on West Virginia in the preseason. I thought Neil Brown would get fired. In terms of BYU, it really depends on who has home field advantage. So, Browns and Beers, if you can tell me, just because I don't want to mess up my screen here, West Virginia's at home. Oh, yeah. Country Roads, take me home. West Virginia win by double digits. Florida State, Pittsburgh. I'm going with Florida State. I think that, Pat Narduzzi has had a knack of pulling some of these games off, but I don't think he believes in his team. His players might be doubting him. They're 2-6, 1-3. Florida State, maybe I'm wrong here. I think they're playing bored. I think against a team like what they did against LSU, or if they play a top 10 team, they'll play up to their competition. Like, I think they're going through the motions and, kind of like throwing the clipboard up in the air, and they're still beating these teams by like 3 touchdowns. Now, that's not to say I think they're the number 1 team in the nation. I have them at number 6 for a reason. But I think there's a lot of untapped potential there. And I don't know. I just can't, I can see Pittsburgh maybe beating them, more likely playing close, but Pittsburgh is just, no. They're not a standard Pittsburgh team. They're horrible.
Pittsburgh is absolutely a disaster this year, and it was to be expected. Their last couple of seasons, they kind of came out of nowhere. They're not a team that just reloads. They're going to have like at least another down year. They'll bounce back in 2025, 2026, but they got rolled by Notre Dame. They lost to a bad Wake Forest team. They lost to Virginia Tech, who is out of nowhere starting to get hot. They got trampled by North Carolina. They just struggle to muster offense. If they can't run the football, it's a wrap. FSU, they're just as dominant as what Michigan kind of is in terms of beating up on ACC teams. Outside of, how they played after that LSU game the first 3 weeks, they're playing their best football. And they got a really convincing win over Duke. And it doesn't matter if Riley Leonard would have stayed healthy. Like, it still would have been, in FSU's favor by that same significant margin.
Yes.
I think with the way they played against Notre Dame, FSU, they probably should still continue to roll them. And just with how explosive their receivers are and their passing attack is with Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson and Jaheim Bell, that's just too much weaponry for Pittsburgh to be able to handle.
Yeah. Oh, I total agreement there. Moose in the chat said they lost to, they lost to Notre Dame 58-7. I mean, Sam Hartman threw 2 picks against Pittsburgh. Who cares? 50 burger. And the comments after the game about how, quote, paraphrasing, we haven't reloaded from previous seasons and the players were all mad. Yeah, Mike Norvell is he's gonna take your cereal and eat it. Okay. Number 9, Oklahoma, traveling to number 22, Oklahoma State. Oklahoma, I thought Oklahoma was one of those teams that, despite all of their good statistics, and I like to be a stat guy, they were top 10 in points per play margin, yards per point margin, scoring offense. They were top 10 in all those things. And in fact, they might still be. But they lost to Kansas. They played close with UCF. And I have to be honest here, and I think their win over Texas was flukish, dare I say it. Like, even after that win against Texas, I looked at that Oklahoma team and I'm thinking to myself, this is not a college football playoff team. This is a team that took advantage of Quinn Ewers, at this point being Quinn Ewers, and Texas being... It looked like Michigan versus TCU, except Texas was in the place of Michigan and Oklahoma was in the place of TCU. Like, the inferior team came out with better motivation, better game plan, and they shocked the life out of what was the better team. I'm picking Oklahoma State here. I think they'll be able to run, much like Kansas did. Kansas was able to run the football, and I know that Alan Bowman doesn't have the mobility of Jason Bean. I think Jason Bean's a much better quarterback, but I also think Oklahoma State has a better defense than Kansas does. I pick Oklahoma State to win in a close one, and they're going to kick Oklahoma out of the Big 12. Happy SEC, Oklahoma.
I'll go Oklahoma. They're still a talented ball club. They're just a team that tends to shoot themselves in the leg. Oklahoma State, if it isn't for Ali Gordon running the offense, I don't really trust Alex Bowman in this game. He's mid. And they got a good group of wide receivers. If they had Spencer Sanders, they probably would be in the run-in for the Big 12 championship. Their defense isn't great. All of their last couple of games have been shootouts. Kansas was a shootout. Kansas really should have beaten them. It just was some stupid-ass play calling. Like, it's 4th and 1. Everybody, Sam, is running a quarterback tush push or a fullback dive. But you know what Kansas decides to do? They decide it's smart on 4th and 1 to call a bubble screen. So for Oklahoma, like, many Sooner fans have been really upset with Jeff Lebby, their offensive coordinator. But I think he kind of gets a little bit too much criticism. Dylan Gabriel can be a little bit turnover prone. He had a pick six like the opening drive last week against Kansas. They had a chance to beat Kansas several times. It's just that they kept giving Kansas opportunities to win the ball game. Jason Bean didn't play great.
No, he didn't.
Yeah, they were able to run the football effectively, but there's only so much your defense can do when your offense is giving up the piss. And I guess Oklahoma felt like Christmas was coming early, and they just wanted to give Kansas a present. And Kansas, to their credit, was able to capitalize. My thing with Oklahoma State is that I don't really like their defense. And they have, in their last 3 games, you know, they had a good game against Cincinnati, but Cincinnati doesn't have a good roster. You know, they gave up 30 to West Virginia. You gave up 30 to Kansas. Anytime they play a competent offense, they normally give up a pretty good amount of points. But at the same time, they held Kansas State to 21. I just kind of like Oklahoma in this game a little bit. I definitely think they needed that loss. They're going to come out a little bit more fiery, and I just trust their defense a lot more than Oklahoma State, and I like their quarterback. But if Oklahoma State can run the football, they got a chance, but I still like the Sooners.
That's understandable. Let's look at the chat before I provide my answer. A lot of people are saying a trap game for Oklahoma coming off loss to Kansas, says Moose. Browns and Beers says Oklahoma's been a team that's been committing a lot of penalties this year, finally caught up to them. Yeah, tons of penalties against Kansas, and allowing that 4th and 6 conversion from the 50 was peak. Well, you thought Brent Venables' defense was fixed, guess not moment. Black Cat says that Oklahoma's been getting exposed, to be honest. Someone earlier said, Kobe Vlash, I think Urban will go to A&M. I think if Jimbo does get fired, that is what will happen. I think if he doesn't get fired, which would be stupid, if you're A&M, you have all the talent in the world, you get Urban, you're like immediately a national title contender in year 1. Urban would totally take that job over Michigan State to satisfy his desire to, you know, be the best of the best, his ego, and get a shot at Nick Saban. But then again, A&M.
What if A&M beats Ole Miss?
Ooh, well, oh my gosh, can Jimbo Fisher just go away? That's my.
You remember last year? You remember last year? Like, they were terrible. They weren't going to make it to a bowl game, and they upset LSU.
That's true. I picked him to go 8-4 last year, and I didn't even have him ranked, and people called me insane, and even I was too high on them. It was ridiculous. Okay, Penn State not being ranked inside the top 10 tells me one thing. You need help to get into the playoff. And with Northwestern not having a winning conference record, with Illinois being horrid, and Iowa, well, Iowa's no offense. They're probably going to lose another game or two. You also need tons of help and chaos to get into the Big Ten championship game. If you're Penn State, your hope is probably to go 11-1 and sneak into the playoff as the 3rd or 4th seed with tons of chaos. AKA, you have, also for the sake of the fact that people were embarrassed by their 20-12 loss to Ohio State, which was really much more dominant for the Buckeyes than the score indicates, you have to beat Michigan. Like, they're going to have a target on Michigan's back. They're probably going to play one of their best games against Michigan. The problem is Maryland is a team that plays up to their competition. They allowed their offense forced about the same amount of yards as their defense has allowed in their past 3 games to Ohio State, Illinois, and Northwestern. They perform at basically a similar level to their competition, outside of, obviously a team like Ohio State and probably Penn State and Michigan, where the talent advantage for those teams is too large to mimic. Only an 8.5 point favorite when Penn State has blown out this team to smithereens. What do you think? That's weird to me.
I like Penn State. Mike Locksley is like James Franklin, but the Diet Coke version, because they kind of have the similar issues. Like, Maryland has so many opportunities to get these big wins, but they always do dumb stuff at the end of the game. Like last year against Ohio State, and even in the close games this year, like, you felt like they should have won, but they still can't find ways to beat good teams. That's their problem. That's why they're still kind of stuck in the middle of the pack. And when Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA come to town, like they're still going to be even more stuck in the middle of the pack because they don't know how to finish off elite teams. Penn State has a really great defense. This game will be close, especially with Penn State having to travel on the road and Drew Aller. That probably was his best performance that we've seen out of him since his performance against Iowa. I still like Penn State to get the win. Maybe they could win by 10. Maybe. I know they did struggle against a weak Indiana team, but at the same time, I just don't really trust Mike Locksley as a head coach in games like this. He just doesn't know how to win these kinds of games.
Yeah, I agree. My prediction earlier today was Penn State 30, Maryland 17, and I think it will be a double-digit lead for much of the game, especially in the second half. If Penn State doesn't cover in this game based off how Maryland has played, maybe I'm wrong in this analysis and future prediction, you better buckle up for Michigan. If Penn State really has to pull away in the final minutes against this Maryland team, if Michigan is what the statistics indicate, if they are what I think they am, not just from a fan perspective, but from an objective perspective, you're going to be in trouble. I think Penn State wins and covers, though. I don't know what happened to Maryland. Maryland might actually finish 5-7 after starting out 5-0 because it's like you said, Mike Locksley. I thought based off how they played OSU that maybe he turned a corner. I don't think so anymore. Virginia Tech at Louisville. I'm picking Louisville. I know that Virginia Tech has looked good in some of their previous matchups, but they're still a 4-4 team. And Jeff Brom, I think, is locked in on that ACC championship game spot.
I like Louisville too.
Amen. Okay, Tulane at East Carolina. I think you and I are going to be on the same page here. East Carolina is the worst team on Michigan's weak schedule. They're 1-7. They're 0-4 in the American. Tulane's one of the best group of 5 teams. I think they win. I think they cover.
Same.
Perfect. Okay, California at Oregon.
Oregon's going to cover.
They're going to cover?
They're at home. You got to go on the zoo. Like I know they put up, damn near 50, but this is the same USC defense that lost to a pig farmer. A pig farmer. Oregon, they're not playing around with their food. They're trying to make a statement. They playing some of their best football all season. They're trying to say, man, like, us losing to Washington was a fluke. And you listen to Dan Lanning, he even admits, like, they kind of outsmarted themselves in that game. Even Will Stein said that if he could go back and call that play again on that last 4th down that eventually put Washington in scoring position, he'll redo it over again. They got a little bit too cute, and it was a reason why they lost that game.
Yeah.
But Kyle, like, anytime you go up against Alex Grinch's defense, like, anytime if you're an opposing quarterback and you see USC on the schedule, you smile at your coach and you say, "Yeah, coach, we finna get our stats up in this game."
I don't get how he has Bear Alexander, Tackett Curtis, Mason Cobb, Eric Gentry, and then Christian Roland Wallace, and I think his name's Cade or
Kalen Bullock.
Kalen.
He's a first round caliber safety.
First-round caliber safety, and they can't cover anyone. It's just nuts. It's unacceptable. I agree with you that Oregon is going to win and cover. What I think is particularly nuts, just briefly about Oregon versus Washington, I don't get why you never run, ever, on those 4th downs. Oregon is one of those few teams in the country who could run on 4th and 5 and actually convert it like 50% of the time. That's how good their run game is. And Washington's rushing defense has been suspect, to say the least. Howdy, Chimichanga Guy. Thank you for being on here. Like much of my subscribers, Chimichanga Guy is an Ohio State Buckeye fan. Welcome on. Oregon wins but doesn't cover. Oregon 42, Cal 21, says Moose. Brownie college football. I have a feeling USC upsets Washington for some reason. However, he agrees that California covers. Okay, so let's jump ahead to Washington, USC, and then we'll briefly come back for Kansas, Iowa State, and Purdue, Michigan. What you told me some things that I thought were very, very interesting early in our show in preparing for this. What do you think about USC versus Washington? I think you had a lot of great points.
I'm picking USC to win because, first of all, Washington doesn't have a consistent pass rush. And anytime you're going up against Caleb Williams, if you can't get a consistent pass rush like Utah and Notre Dame were able to do, he's just gonna dot your defense up. And Washington doesn't have a bad defense, but with the talent that USC has at wide receiver, as long as you give Caleb Williams some time to throw the football, he's going to carve you to shreds. And listen, we know this is going to be a back and forth affair. But I think with USC playing at home, they're still a really good football team. Yeah, they got 2 losses to Notre Dame and Utah. It's no shame in losing to those teams. It's not like those teams aren't quality teams. USC is just too good to not be able to win a game against either Washington or Oregon. Like, they're going to end up ruining somebody's college football playoff hopes. And Washington hasn't played their best football. I don't think Michael Penix is as great as how people make him out to be. He has a tendency to start games a little bit slow. USC can kind of hit the ground running. I don't think Washington has the front that's going to be able to push USC's offensive line around with their offensive line not being that great. And Caleb Williams is him. There's been a lot of things said about Caleb Williams that I don't really agree with. People don't know Caleb Williams' character. Caleb Williams isn't the kind of guy to quit on his team. His teammates love him, and Lincoln Riley admires his fight and his tenacity. Like, this is one of those games where Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams, they're coming into this thing with something to prove. Like, they're not throwing in the top one of the season. Like, they want to F up somebody's season, and Washington damn near lost to Stanford. They damn near lost to Arizona State, who, like I told you off stream, like, they're so bad when it comes to, their lack of talent that they have to get guys to walk on just to fill out a field goal protection team.
Yeah.
I like USC with the upset. Like, I'm getting sick and tired of people writing off Caleb Williams, calling him overrated, calling him overhyped. Like, no, there's a reason why Caleb Williams is regarded as one of the greatest draft prospects in NFL draft history. Like, a lot of people are about to get a rude awakening about how good Caleb Williams actually is against Washington. Like, I get it. It's easy to write off a team that has 2 losses, but it's not like it's the end of the world. Just because you can't make it to the college football playoffs doesn't mean that your season is over. Like, USC still is playing for some respect. They're playing for pride. Like, Lincoln Riley still is a really good head coach. Like, I don't think this team's just going to roll over and die. Like, Washington's in for an L, their first loss of the season.
I think that whether it's this game or the road trip to Oregon State, there's a really good chance that Washington drops one based off of how they've played. I'm picking Washington to win, and I'm picking them to cover, but I don't think it'll be Caleb Williams' fault. I think that Washington's defense is suspect as it looked against Stanford. Oregon was able to, abuse it, particularly in the second half. And even, Boise State, Tulsa. I mean, they're at California in the second half. There's been times where their defenses look suspect. Their defense is miles ahead of USC's. I mean, Washington, when they function, can produce a top 25 defense that can contain the run game, that has a decent performance at secondary. USC has to play absolutely perfect offensively, I think, to win this, unless Washington just flat out plays bad for the 3rd game in a row, which I don't think will happen because they're well coached. This is tough, especially because I think that Vegas is baiting people into picking Washington, which I think Vegas probably likes USC here. I just think it's hard to comprehend how good or rather how bad Alex Grinch's defense is. I mean, it's that hard. But I think you bring up a lot of good points. I think that Caleb Williams won't be the reason they lose here, like in the same way that he was when, let's say, they lost to Notre Dame. And Washington has I mean, I don't know what happened to Washington exactly. They haven't been playing well, straight up. Kansas over Iowa State, Michigan over rather Iowa State over Kansas as the line would indicate, and Michigan over Purdue. I am picking Michigan, and you know what? I'm going to pick Iowa State. I know yeah.
Ryan Walters, the head coach of Purdue, came out and he was one of the coaches that said, yeah, like these fools out here cheating, they need some discipline. And it's cool because, yeah, Michigan cheated, but at the same time, you're playing them this week. Like, Michigan's about to roll you over. They're about to stump you to sleep. And, I don't think it's going to look pretty for what's about to happen to Purdue. It's like, I probably would have kept that till after the game because now they got every ammunition to want to embarrass you.
Yeah. Oh, my pick's Michigan 59, Purdue 7. I mean, that... Michigan's already the most efficient team in the country. From what we know, we don't know for sure. They haven't played anyone who can really compete with them. But from what we know, they're the most efficient team in college football. And now they have motivation to kill everyone. I mean, that could... Michigan could realistically win out every one of the remaining games by like double digits. Which is... part of the reason, but part of me suspects, and this probably is fan bias, so I'm not going to make it like an official take of mine. Part of me does suspect that a lot of Big Ten head coaches want Michigan to be punished like here, now, especially if you're Penn State and Ohio State, because part of me is thinking like there's a chance that this won't end well for you. But I'm not going to make that an official take, because we don't know yet how those games will be decided. And I have a lot of respect for Ohio State, a lot of respect for the Big Ten and Penn State. And let's just see where it goes. I'm picking Michigan, obviously, and I'm picking Iowa State too. But if Kansas wins, it wouldn't shock me.
I'm picking Kansas. Iowa State is one of those teams. They're very good defensively. I just think Kansas, even though they don't have a defense, I don't think Iowa State's offense is that great. They're really one of those teams that their defense creates opportunities for them. They can't get after the quarterback. They also don't really have a great secondary. How are they against the run? They're pretty formidable against the run, but Kansas is a balanced team. They can beat you on the air and on the ground also. I like Kansas. Iowa State's offense doesn't do anything impressive. Like, they're 96 in American rushing yards per game. They also are, like, middle of the pack and, like, passing yards per game. They're a team that they're going to stay around if, you're not fundamentally sound, you have too many costly turnovers and penalties, and they haven't really beaten the team that really has been all that impressive to me, honestly. They beat Baylor, who is ass, or my fault. Cincinnati is terrible. TCU is terrible. Like, Oklahoma, they got blown out by 30. They did beat Oklahoma State, but that's when Oklahoma State was kind of a little bit cold.
Yeah.
And then you beat Iowa. Well, you lost to Iowa and Ohio. Like, I think I trust Kansas to win this game.
I hope you're right, because I love Lance Leipold, and in NCAA 14 I used to play as Kansas just because I liked their logo and I wanted to see him be great. I hope, I hope Kansas wins out and just causes some massive chaos. So I hope you're right. I have a lot of faith in Kansas. I think there's actually a good chance they could, if they lose this game, they win out, because that rivalry game with Kansas State, anything can happen in a rivalry game. And if they win this game, they're probably destined to lose a third regular season game, guaranteed. But I think they're a top 25 team.
Unless Jalen Daniels can come back this year.
Yes, that's true. I hope we see him again. He's a phenomenal player. Someone just said that you'll love this. Connor Stallions is fired, apparently, in regards to the chat. Let me check that really quickly.
And there was another Michigan staffer who got fired for, something inappropriate that he got caught doing allegedly with a minor.
Yup. Yeah. Oh yeah. And Connor Stallings is gone officially. Not looking pretty for Michigan whatsoever. Rough times in Ann Arbor. Him being fired after all this reporting about him being on the sidelines is just making me think, okay, how, why, and also who did we hire? Okay. Last few games, and then we'll get on to college football playoff predictions. Then we'll briefly talk about Michigan, that whole scandal, and top 10 quarterbacks as well. Let me answer the chat. Nolan Brown told us and informed us about this news. Chimichanga Guy says, can we all just hope and pray Alabama and Georgia lose tomorrow? I'll be doing so, for sure.
I'm going for Bama. I don't know why people just want Alabama just to crash and burn so much, but this is Nick Saban's best coaching job. Nobody had those boys winning no more. People thought Alabama possibly could have 3-4 losses. Alabama's defense is so legit. They have a top 5, top 3 defense in America. Last time Alabama faced a team with a top offense, they held them to 10 points. That was Ole Miss. They held Tennessee scoreless in the second half. Jalen Milroe, he's got better throughout the season. You got Jermaine Burton breaking out. You also got another wide receiver that's starting to break out. Alabama's offense is not pretty, but it's good enough to get the job done. LSU has one of the worst defenses that I've seen them put on the field in a very long time. It's funny how they claim they're DBU, but yet their defensive backs are awful.
They are. Their defensive backs are like wet dog. And they're all injured, too, by the way. They're all hurt. So I think Milroe is probably going to have a field day. There's another part of me, though, that looks at this. And you said Alabama's defense, you think, is top 2, top 3. There's an argument for that. I look at them letting Joe Milton tear them apart for a half. I'm looking at Quinn Ewers take off their head, and we know how inconsistent Quinn Ewers is. I think they're a great defense, a near-elite defense, maybe elite. I don't think they have the Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, heck, even Georgia defense. I know Georgia has allowed some things here and there, but I think Georgia has a better secondary, and Georgia has a higher ceiling defensively. I think Alabama's defense is really, really good. I don't want to get that misinterpreted, but I don't think their defense can compensate for how inconsistent and sometimes awful in terms of 3 and outs Alabama's offense is. And I think LSU's offense can actually compensate for how bad their defense is, because they just score. You can't stop Jaden Daniels. He's too good. He can run on you, up the middle, to the side, horizontal, vertical, and he can pass on you. He's he's a prolific passer now. With Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas and Logan Diggs can run on you. They have a good O-line. I think this is going to be a shootout. This is an emotional pick. It's definitely fueled by emotion. So do not follow this advice in terms of betting. I'm picking LSU to win. But if Bama wins, I would not be shocked whatsoever. Saban doesn't lose revenge games. I'm going against my better judgment here.
And plus, they got to do this on the road in Tuscaloosa. I'm tired of people making it seem like just anybody can go up to Tuscaloosa and win. They've only lost a handful of games in Tuscaloosa in the last 8 years. Texas is a great team. We had a feeling Texas, they were going to be legit this year. Ole Miss rolled into that thing. People thought they was going to lose another one. They got smacked. They held them to 10 points. The fact that Ole Miss offense got held to 10 points, listen, we get that. Tennessee did get the best of Alabama in the first half, but Alabama was the way more physical football team than Tennessee. Tennessee got stopped on 4th and short so many times with designed quarterback runs with Joe Milton. LSU isn't that team that's built off physicality. Their defense can't stop anything. They can't stop the run. They can't stop the pass. They can't get after the quarterback. It's you have to have more than just one way to beat Alabama. You just can't say we're going to beat Alabama because we're all offense. Yeah. Alabama's defense, their secondary has had problems with giving up a couple of big plays here and there. And they did get out to a sluggish start, but they scored 24-27 unanswered to end that game.
Yes.
And Jalen Milroe has the ability to hit the deep ball consistently. It's like you're going to need some defense in this game. And Alabama's defense, I don't think LSU is going to go up and down the field on them at will. Like, Alabama has a really good front seven. Dallas Turner, really good linebackers, really good defensive linemen. This is a really stout Alabama defense, especially when you look at the front seven. The only reason you can't make an argument for them being as good as what Ohio State and Michigan's defense are is because their secondary has too many lapses, and they will give us some big plays, but I think as far as them being able to keep Jaden Daniels on the wraps, if they can do that, it kind of puts a little bit more pressure on their offense because Jaden Daniels, like, I think he doesn't get talked about enough when it comes to the Heisman conversation. What he does on the ground is just special. He's a really elusive runner. He just finds a way to break out the tackles and get big runs. It's just that LSU isn't as good as a team as they need to be to beat Alabama. And Texas has a really good defense. Texas has a top 25 defense. They also have a really efficient defense. You know,
Yes.
like Texas played a complete all-around ball game against Alabama. They were destroying them on defense. They were giving it to them on offense. It's just LSU literally, if you look at the statistics, LSU's defense ranks in the bottom of nearly every statistical category. It's like their defense is just as bad as USC's. I don't know who the hell their defensive coordinator is, but he has to hit the bricks too.
Matt House, who I thought was I thought he was a top 10 DC to enter the season, and like 3 or 4 games in, I'm thinking, what are you doing? You have Harold Perkins, you have Mekhi Wingo, and you have Mason Smith, and your defense honestly looks like it looks like nothing good. It looks horrendous. LSU, what they should do, since at least their front seven has some competence, they should go and prevent the whole game to prevent the deep shot, because Alabama might mess up with their offensive line despite only having 3 defenders because their O-line's suspect. Yeah. Let's check the chat. Being at Bryant-Denny at night is a big deal for Alabama. That's a very good point, Hummus Hero. Thank you for being on here. And Chimichanga Guy, I didn't want to ignore this chat. I just became a Heisman patron, Sam. I want to support and help out as much as I can. You're the best college football channel on YouTube. Thank you very much, Chimichanga Guy. I appreciate the compliment and the support. Remember to check out my Patreon page via the link in the video description, and you can also find it in the chat. Actually, I'm going to post it in the chat right now. And remember to check out JTSports channel as well. I mean, he covers a lot more than I do. If you're interested in the NFL, he covers the NFL, knows a lot more about the NFL than I do. I used to joke about with friends that the only thing I knew, regarding the NFL was the fact that Tom Brady was with the Patriots. And then that's like an era gone by. I obviously know more than that, but JT Sports, good with NFL, good with college football. He covers he covers more conferences than I do. So check out his channel via the link in the description. Also in the title of this live stream, you can, click at JT Sports and give him a subscribe and click the notification bell. And also watch some of his recent content, some of his preview and prediction videos. Thanks to all of you for supporting. SFS Inverted says he's cheering for LSU. I agree with you. I'm also doing well. Everyone's talking about Connor Stallions being fired. It's just funny. Oregon State at Colorado. You're someone who was right about Colorado in the preseason and the fact that they actually, beat TCU. You called it to happen. You called them to go over on their, preseason win total, which was 3.5. I didn't. You've been very right on Colorado in a way that I haven't. They are beginning to fall apart, but that's kind of been.
New play caller too. Sean Lewis isn't the OC no more. They promoted Pat Shermer.
What?
Yeah, like I don't know. Like, but it's like the thing with Sean Lewis. I didn't think he was a bad play caller. The dude just doesn't know how to run the football after the first quarter.
Well, no. I mean, he did it at Kent State, but he has no offensive. Shedeur Sanders has been sacked an average of 5 times per game in a conference with no defense.
And guess what, Sam?
What?
It's not going to get any better because UCLA, they had a top 15 pass rush. Like number 15, Laiatu Latu, he's probably going to be a top 5, top 10 pick. Like,
oh yeah.
UCLA's defensive line had an all-you-can-sack fest on Shedeur Sanders. Like, it was people saying he was holding the ball too long. I was like, man, be quiet. Like, you telling me holding the ball for 0.2 seconds is long? It's like as soon as he got the ball, he was running for his life back there. I told people after the game, Shedeur Sanders probably is going to need to file for disability benefits, and he probably is going to need to hover around after that game. Like, there was a report that said during halftime, he was so banged up, he needed an IV.
Wow.
And Oregon State's defensive line is just as good also. It's just that DJ Uiagalelei, like, his stats are so misleading. He has 17 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, but every time I watch him play against a competent team, like, I'm just like, bro, like, you're mid. Like, he's just so mid. He overthrows wide open wide receivers. Like, he's just so slow. Like, I'm not hating on the dude. Like, he's solid. I'm not saying he sucks, but I think, like, he can keep Colorado in this game just because of how inaccurate of a thrower he is. I think he'll give Travis Hunter a couple more interceptions, too. Like, the thing is just that if you can't win up front, you really can't do anything. Yeah. You know, football is still win and loss in the trenches. Imagine if Colorado had to play Michigan. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, oh, my. Imagine if it was Colorado traveling to Georgia instead of Missouri. Like, it just... Turn off the TV after the first quarter. It would look like Ohio State versus Michigan State circa 2017 or 2021. It would be that bad. And I feel bad for Shedeur Sanders because I think he's a top 15, top 20 quarterback. He just has one of the worst offensive lines in the entire FBS.
I think Shedeur is a top 5 quarterback in college football right now. I mean, I think he's the third best QB right now. Like, if it wasn't for him, Colorado would have no wins.
That's very true. I mean, he carries that team. I'm picking Oregon State to win and cover because Oregon State can run. Oregon State's defense is really weird though. Like, they have they have a good DC, I think, and they have underrated talent, but they don't click. There's something wrong with Oregon State's defense. So I can see Colorado covering, and it is a night game, and it's going to be full because, look, with Deion Sanders there, the hype around Colorado it's not going to die, especially in the first 2 years when he's still new and he's still, like, you know, people are getting adjusted to him. I just think Oregon State, also with Silas Bolden, and I think the other wide receiver's name is Gould, and then Damian Martinez, and that offensive line, they're gonna light Colorado's defense on fire. That's my personal opinion. Yeah.
Well, the thing is that Colorado has shown the ability. Anytime they're an underdog, they cover. They covered against USC. They didn't cover against Oregon, but they did cover against UCLA also. So they do have the ability to cover. Like, their defense probably had the best game of the season outside of that game against Nebraska week 2. And DJ Uiagalelei, like, he's going to have a couple of throws that he's going to give to Colorado. Like, he's going to be the sole reason why I think he's going to end up, you know, like, he's going to be the sole reason why I think Colorado covers. He's going to keep Colorado in this game, even though I don't think Colorado's going to win. Just with how inconsistent he's been, like, I kind of feel like they might bench him.
Yeah.
Honestly, like, it could be one of those performances.
Aiden Childs is good. He's the future of that program.
Really good.
Oh, yeah. Elite quarterback under Jonathan Smith. I'll tell you what though about DJ Uiagalelei. You put him at Clemson, they're still in the top 25. Not that they would be a top 25 team, but they would have beaten NC State. They would have beaten Miami. I mean, Cade Klubnik looks like John O'Korn. He's that terrible. And Michigan fans in the chat will, like, you know, screen fades to black and white and John O'Korn throwing games away to Wisconsin and Ohio State. He's not good. Last but certainly not least, because I think Arizona's a top 25 team, you and I both know how good UCLA is. Who do you think wins here?
I'm taking Arizona. UCLA's offense, they didn't look all that impressive to me. Colorado's defense definitely did get the best of them for most of that game, but the fact that the offense couldn't do anything, their defense got worn out and gashed. UCLA is a power run team. They benched Dante Moore. I wonder what's going to happen with him. That's a discussion for another day.
Yep.
I can't think of the name of the quarterback that they got starting right now.
Ethan Garbers or Colin Schlee.
Yeah. So they're starting Ethan Garbers. You know, he's probably their best option. Colin Schlee more is just a great athlete than he is as a true quarterback. And he is pretty solid. The thing is just that, you know, UCLA is just a run-heavy team. They're a power run team. That's the strength of their team, and they're relying on great defense. They have somebody whose son is, you know, his pops was Anthony Lynn, who was a former head coach in the National Football League. He's a really fast and up-and-coming defensive coordinator, and if I'm Lincoln Riley, I'm probably trying to see how much money it takes to get him.
Yeah, I think it's DeAnton Lynn. It's his name. Yeah. Oh,
because you got to remember,
yeah,
UCLA coming into before last season, like they had similar problems like USC on defense. They had a defensive coordinator that wasn't good. Fans wanted him gone, and basically how UCLA got Chip Kelly to part ways with him is that they're like, hey, you want us to give you this extension, you got to get rid of him.
Yeah. DeAnton Lynn, Jim Leonard, Mike Tressel. Those are some names that USC should be paying attention to for their defensive coordinator job opening. I'm picking Arizona to win as well for the same reasons as you are, also because Noah Fifita is an elite quarterback. Like, really, really good. Also, Jacob Coing, awesome. Over under, or not over under, but like odds for Alex Grinch being fired after the Washington game, like immediately after. I'd be very optimistic to a certain degree about that. Okay, we're going to transition here into talking about our college football playoff picks. I had you go first for a lot of the opinions on the games, just because I wanted to, you know, gauge where you're at. You provided a lot of good analysis. I mean, you nearly changed my mind for that Clemson Notre Dame game, and I basically relied off of you to pick that Arizona UCLA matchup. My college football playoff picks right now, and if you're subscribed to me, you saw this in my community post talking about my top 25. And my New Year's Six Bowl projections. For my Sugar Bowl, I have Georgia as the number 1 overall seed taking on Oregon. I have Michigan in the Rose Bowl as the number 2 overall seed taking on number 3 Florida State. I think Georgia right now is a top 5 team. I think they're near elite, maybe elite. Even with one loss, I think Oregon is playing at a totally different level. Georgia still maintains the better defense. They have a great offense. Both teams don't have very good special teams. In fact, Georgia and Oregon, mirror each other in a lot of different ways. Georgia being more talented, having the better defense. But I think Oregon has an elite run game. And Georgia's defense has had problems stopping the run. Oregon's defense, not so much. They shut down Utah's run game. Washington only had success running on them because Washington never runs the football. They situationally run. So Washington, as long as they don't like rush for more than like 20, 25 times a game with their O-line, they will tear you apart on the ground for like 4 or 5 yards per carry to keep you honest. I think Oregon right now would beat Georgia, and they might beat Georgia in the same way that Ohio State was beating Georgia last year in the Peach Bowl, like until they blew away that game. I think Georgia, they don't have the same wide receiver play that Oregon does. Oregon has like Jordan James, Bucky Irving. They're averaging 7 yards per carry. I see you laughing, but I mean, Oregon's running for 7 yards per carry, and they have a mobile quarterback. What has Georgia struggled against? Good run games, good O-lines, a mobile quarterback, and Bo Nix has broken his streak of being trash on the road. I mean, he played well against Washington, and he tore up an awesome Utah defense. A Utah defense that I think is more efficient than this Georgia defense. Georgia, I think they're winning out in the SEC, though. No one on their schedule. I think no one in the SEC, except for maybe themselves, compared to Oregon right now. Georgia can totally three-peat. Without Brock Bowers, that might actually help them discover their offense. I just think Oregon right now is the better team. I think they win in the Sugar Bowl. For the Rose Bowl, number 2 Michigan, I think, beats number 3 Florida State. I think Michigan's the best team in the country right now, and I think it'll remain the case, as you can see by the fact that I have them beating Oregon in the national championship. However, I think Georgia, because of the fact they're the 2-time national champion, and I think they're going to dominate Missouri, they're going to beat Ole Miss, they're going to dominate Tennessee, they'll dominate like a Georgia Tech team that's the best in several years, and they're going to actually play someone in their championship game, while Michigan will probably get matched up with a scrub. They'll get the 1 seed. Michigan will get the 2 seed. They'll beat Florida State handily, I think, although I can see Florida State, given how Michigan has struggled against mobile quarterbacks in the past. Michigan struggles against elite skill position play. See Quentin Johnson against our secondary and against our linebackers last year. That sucked. Keon Coleman burned Michigan in 2022. He basically was the only reason MSU was ever in that game outside of their defense. Michigan beats Florida State. Obviously, I think by more than Oregon would beat Georgia. Oregon-Georgia would be the better matchup, I think, than Michigan-Florida State. Florida State has struggled to run for much of the season, except on big runs, and they have struggled to stop the run. I think Michigan will get their run game correct. The national championship game is going to be intriguing. I think Michigan will go over Oregon, but Oregon is the one team outside of Ohio State that actually scares me as a Michigan fan. Ohio State scares me because despite having a worse run game than the previous 2 seasons on average, they found a way to control the clock. They have an elite defense, and I think they have mental toughness that they've lacked in the past 2 seasons. That scares me. Oregon can run. They have the best run game in all of college football right now. I think a lot of that has to do with their offensive line and also the fact they have, speed backs. Michigan has more power backs with Corum and Mullings, and they have one running back in Edwards who can break off if he finds the right opportunity. Oregon is an elite rushing attack. They have a receiver who absolutely could take advantage of a Michigan secondary that has allowed some big plays. However, at the end of the day, I think Michigan is a better defense than Oregon, and their offensive efficiency numbers, look this up on ESPN. Michigan, according to ESPN, actually has a more efficient offense than Oregon. That sounds like heresy, but you can look this up. ESPN Analytics. Michigan, their offensive efficiency is only second to one team, the LSU Tigers. Michigan's offense in terms of passing yards per attempt, and they can, in terms of running the football, they're great. So I think it's going to be between Michigan and Oregon for the national title. Washington and Ohio State are the next 2 teams that I would see getting in if I had to exchange teams, like Washington instead of Oregon or Ohio State instead of Florida State if Florida State loses a game. I think a 12-1 Florida State, given how weak the ACC is, doesn't reach the college football playoff. I'm going to answer the chat, and a lot of the chat, and then get some thoughts of you on my playoff picks, and then we'll talk about yours. Someone said Kansas 21, Iowa State 20. Husker Chuck says this. Go Cyclones, says Brownie College Football. Someone just said Ryan Walters talks a lot of crap. What can you expect from a Colorado alumni? Oh, we won't go there. So good to see you all talking about something positive and expressing. Not that I'm going to dismiss your comment, Justin. I think Colorado has at the beginning of the season, I think they were disrespected and they played a little too much into that desire to get back at people. And now it's just kind of like, now Colorado's kind of a normal team, and I think that's actually good for them. Like, you're not seeing ESPN post about them 24/7. They can, like, finally work at their own business, and yeah, I think Deion Sanders' future is great. So good to see you all talking about something positive and expressing opinions without arguing with each other. I love to see it keep grinding. Thank you, RBLJ1. Have a great day. Do you think the Big Ten will listen and get this sorted out before the season's end? No, because the Big Ten doesn't have all the evidence yet. And also, I've heard rumors that that some of the information about Michigan might have been illegally obtained, which, if that's the case, that turns this whole case into a mess. And if the evidence was obtained illegally, I'll tell you what's going to happen. Michigan will be known cheaters, but because the evidence was obtained illegally, they'll get away with it, and everyone in the Big Ten will be so irate. It would be a toxic fest of no comparison. And Ohio State and Penn State and all these other schools would be rightfully, to a certain degree, out for blood, because Michigan got caught cheated, and they should be penalized for that. But we don't know. We don't know so many things yet. All we know is that Michigan cheated. They need to be punished to some degree. What that punishment is or what the evidence is, we don't know all of that yet. But I also want to disclose fully, as a Michigan fan, I'm not in the delusion that, Michigan did no wrong. That's asinine. Just sub to JT. Thank you so much, Chimichanga guy. Really appreciate that. Did anyone expect Stallions to come back? No. Black Cat says flex the watch in reference to Shadur Sanders. Why do you think OSU won't be in the college football playoff? I think OSU would actually be better than Florida State, and this is a bold opinion. I think they might be better than Georgia. The problem is an 11-1. Oh, he just got off the screen. It's not good. An 11-1 Ohio State is not okay. Good. Thank you for coming back. An 11-1 OSU with how many likely one loss or undefeated conference champions there'll be. I mean, you don't think a one-loss Big Ten team who doesn't get to Indy will reach the playoffs, right? I think that's unlikely.
I don't think they're going to put in a one-loss team just because it's too many other one-loss teams that will have, like, stronger resumes. And also, like, are you going to put in a one-loss Big Ten team over a one-loss Oregon or a one-loss Washington?
Yeah, especially if OSU didn't play for their conference title. Meanwhile, Oregon or Washington did and won it. Yeah, I mean, OSU, I think they have the best resume right now. Of all teams that I'm projecting to have one loss outside of conference champions, they'd have the best resume. So if Florida State wets the bed, or Oregon and Washington and Oregon State and USC just cannibalize each other, OSU will sneak in. I predicted that to be the case in the preseason. I hope it happens so that I'm right, but I'm not counting on it right now.
And even then, what if Georgia only loses to, let's say, Alabama in the SEC championship game? Like, their November stretches, the toughest stretch out of anybody. That means they'll have wins over a ranked Tennessee squad, probably top 10 Ole Miss squad. And also, like, they got to win. They'll have a win over Missouri. So if they just lose to Bama in the SEC championship game, you'll have to put Bama in too and Georgia.
It depends. A lot of this stuff depends. Like, if Ohio State loses to Michigan by 21 or just by 7, it just in the example of what I'm projecting, which is they'll lose, that could be what decides if they get in the playoffs or not. Because if Michigan beats Ohio State by, let's say, 21 and Georgia only loses by 7 to Alabama, well, then Georgia with an extra win even if they have maybe a weaker strength of schedule, they at least competed in their loss. Therefore, they probably get in over Ohio State. But if Ohio State loses to Michigan by, let's say, a field goal on the road against a team who has an argument to be number one, and Georgia just gets, like, destroyed by Alabama, Georgia's out instantly. So
they can't be, Sam, because it's like you'll have a win over Missouri, Tennessee, okay, Ole Miss. Like, these are like 3 top 15 teams. Like, the committee has value, strength of schedule, strength of wins. And if you just lose in your conference championship game to Alabama after you've ran the table with that tough of a stretch, a one-loss Ohio State team, like, those wins against Notre Dame and I'm trying to Penn State, they're impressive, but 3 wins against that gauntlet of a schedule, Tennessee, Missouri, Ole Miss, those are essentially like 3 top 15 opponents. It's like, I don't think they're going to leave out Georgia with 1 loss in the SEC championship game. It's just like Georgia's just been too dominant with how tough their November stretch is, because it's not like you can't say they haven't played nobody up to that point if it happens, because you just played a gauntlet of a schedule. It'll just be a really messy scenario, but yes, they haven't really penalized a team that's been undefeated in the regular season and lost their conference championship game. It's like we could get 2 Big Ten schools in there at the same time and 2 SEC schools in there at the same time, possibly, because then it'll be the argument, okay, well, like, are you going to put, or because then you'll be making an argument for, all right, well, Georgia has 1 loss, but they had a stronger strength of schedule than FSU, even though FSU, like, they beat Notre Dame, they beat LSU. You feel me? But at the same time, it's like Oregon will have a 1 loss, and they also will have a strong argument. Any of the 1 loss Pac-12 teams, if they don't win out, they will have a legitimate argument, because if you have 1 loss, that means that you beaten at least like Utah, USC, like, you'll have some quality wins. It'll just be a resume thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the beauty of this season is no one's a playoff lock yet. And there are teams where if they only lose 1 game, that might kick them out. So there's a lot of pressure on everyone to be perfect. I think especially with this cheating scandal thing with Michigan, if Michigan loses 1 game, I think it's very similar to Penn State. Like, I don't know if Penn State can make it without serious chaos. I think if Michigan loses just 1 game, because they haven't played really anyone else outside of Penn State, or maybe Ohio State, depending on if they lose to the Nittany Lions or the Buckeyes, they'll be toast. Oh, your college football playoff predictions. Explain this to everyone.
I appreciate you for having me on here, Sam. Appreciate the opportunity to come on here, talk college football with you. I got a lot of love for you, man. Like, I got a lot of love for you, but I got to kind of get into you, man, because, like, I feel like you severely overlooked the SEC, man. Like, because last year you picked TCU to beat Georgia, and TCU got shredded. And it's like, I don't really feel like you give the SEC its props. Like, Georgia, there's no. I could see Oregon competing with Georgia, and they definitely could beat Georgia, because no team looks unbeatable. Any team could get it, but it's just like Alabama has been a really good team this year. Like, I get it. Michigan has been very dominant, but I can't claim that they're the best team in college football if you haven't beaten any of the best teams in college football. To be the man, you have to beat the man. You feel me? And until I see Michigan beat Penn State, I'm very reluctant to say they're the best team in college football, because people try to make this argument for Oklahoma last year before they played anybody, and then we see how that went. I don't think that would happen to Michigan. I definitely think they should take care of business against Penn State. I'm not going to count out Ohio State just because how good that defense is playing. Like, I definitely think that defense is going to be able to slow down Michigan. I just think that, the SEC, man, you got Alabama, you got Georgia there. Georgia still hasn't lost to a team in nearly 2 years. They've run through every single team that you put on their schedule. Even though they play down the competition at times, they play up the competition. All right, like Georgia, the team that consistently you put a good team in front of their face and they annihilate them. It doesn't matter if it's on the road, neutral site, at home. They just been home records in a sense. And Georgia is a really good team, even without Brock Bowers, who is a top 5 player in America. Not too many teams could lose a player of Brock Bowers' caliber and still annihilate their rival school the way that they did against Florida. Like, they're one of those teams that they just find ways to continue to dominate. Like, they're a football factory. They don't rebuild, they reload. Raw Thomas was a 4 or 5-star guy coming out of high school. Lad McConkey was averaging nearly 20 yards per reception. You know, like they got plenty of guys. Like their offensive line, nobody talks about this, but their offensive line has some injuries. Their starting center missed some time with injuries. They got like a offensive tackle who's missed significant time with injuries. So they're not fully healthy neither. With the way that Georgia has played against big time opponents in big games, they get up for it. I'm not gonna even this year, like they blew out Kentucky, they blew out Florida, and then they beat the brakes off, you know, like Missouri. Like, listen, I get that it's easy to count out Georgia because, you know, Michigan looks so much dominant. But at the same time, like, Kentucky is still better than any team that Michigan has played up to this point. You know, even Auburn, you can make an argument, who took Georgia to the wire. Without Brock Bowers, they lose that game. Even they are better than any team that Michigan has played up to this point. If you want to make the argument that Rutgers could beat Auburn, I would want to hear that argument. You know, like, even then, like, Florida is better than any team that Michigan has beaten up to this point. Even though Georgia has a weak schedule, we know Georgia has a tendency to get up for big games. I'm not going to question that. But I do feel like you're underselling Georgia a little bit too much. Like, they have one of the most talented rosters in all of college football in terms of blue chip talent. They're second behind Alabama. 88% of their roster is comprised of blue chips. And if you look at the past college football playoff winners, the teams that have the most talented rosters win or make it to the national championship majority of the time. Michigan, nobody really saw them losing to TCU the way they did. You know, but they kind of shot themselves in the foot in that game. They didn't play their best football. Now, when I look at Oregon, at the same time, it's like, what's their best win right now? Utah with a third-string quarterback with hella injuries. Like, no disrespect to Utah, all right? But it's like, against the elite teams, they probably were going to have a hard time. When you have a third-string quarterback, like Kyle Whittingham has been winning with table scraps, he probably should win Coach of the Year. Oregon, they still have a lot to prove in their own right. You feel me? We got to see what they can do against USC because they did lose to Washington. It's kind of hard to say, like, they're the best team, even though we both said it, but they still lost to Washington at the end of the day. You feel me? So it's like, I just feel like the Big Ten, they're not as great as a conference as many people think. All right, it's like outside of the big three, Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, the rest of the Big Ten is a wash. Wisconsin is respectable, but even then, they lost to Washington State. Washington State hasn't been great this year. You feel me? Like, I don't know what the hell has happened to Washington State. Like, the Big Ten, once Oregon, Washington, and those boys get to town, and USC, they'll be really tough. But the SEC top to bottom, like, there's a reason why Georgia doesn't have to schedule tough out of conference opponents. Like, if your conference is just so tough by itself, it's like you got to give that consideration. And Alabama is just like, you know, they're Alabama. This is Nick Saban's best coaching job. It's just like my playoff predictions, I got Georgia at 1. I think they'll win out. I think they'll beat Alabama in the SEC championship game. At 2, I'll go with Michigan. I think that they probably will win out too. Like, I think to beat Michigan, you still have to have a little bit of offense. I don't trust Kyle McCord. I know Michigan is a talented team. I don't need to see them play against another talented team to know that. You feel me? But at the same time, it's like, if I'm going to call them the best team in college football, I still have to see it, and I have to see the results first before I can give them that right. And then the next thing is this, right? I got Michigan at 2. At 3, I got FSU. I think the only team that is really capable of beating FSU is Miami. North Carolina, like they just lost to 2 of the worst teams in the ACC back-to-back weeks, like Georgia Tech, Virginia. Like good riddance to them. Even though they do got Drake, man, I think they went out. Number 4, it'll be tough. You really gonna leave out a 1-loss Texas school if they win out when they got the best win in the country against Alabama on the road? We're going to leave out potentially a 1-loss Pac-12 team. And hell, what if Washington goes undefeated?
Yeah.
I think like my national championship pick, I probably will go Georgia, Washington, not Georgia, Washington, Georgia, Michigan. And I still like Georgia to get the win. It's just like, you know, I just think that people are really overlooking Georgia when, Michigan, I know they're a great team, but at the end of the day, like I know what Georgia does in big games. They've been proven. They deserve kind of the benefit of a doubt until Michigan can really earn it. Like the last time we saw Michigan play Georgia, people seem to forget like they got rolled. I like JJ McCarthy.
34-11.
And then even then, people made it seem like Michigan was a lock to make it to the national championship last year, and they got humbled by TCU. Like, you don't see that happening to Georgia.
No, you don't.
But it's like
not.
The Big Ten is a really good conference. Like they're not a great conference. It's not like you're a terrible conference. You got like some great teams that are middle of the pack and things like that. There's not really a great top conference. But if we were to rank in these conferences, we'll have to go SEC number 1, Pac-12 second, Big Ten. Hell, like, yeah, I'll put Big Ten third. ACC hasn't been as bad. Like, you got Louisville, you got NC State, who's kind of solid. Like, you also got UNC, even though they got 2 losses. You got FSU. Like, it's some okay teams. Hell, I'm going to throw Notre Dame in there. They play an ACC schedule, so they're part of the ACC, even if it's not official. You feel me? But even then, it's like the Big Ten, I don't think 2 Big Ten schools are going to get in unless it's Ohio State potentially. And even then, I still think they need to be in the Big Ten championship. But if Georgia loses to Alabama in the SEC championship, they're still going to put them in at 4. Yes. They're going to be in regardless. Now, if Michigan loses, it's a different argument because then your strength of schedule is on par with Washington's and Oregon's, and you open yourself out to get overseeded by somebody. Ohio State is like, they still need to beat Michigan to get to the Big Ten championship, unless Michigan loses to Penn State. So that's my 4. But I love you, man. It's just like, I just feel like when it comes to these SEC schools, you kind of sell Georgia just a little bit short. And everybody has doubted Georgia so many times. Like, I've just seen this way too many times where I bet against Georgia. I don't think Georgia's that good. And they smack a team to hell.
Yeah. Oh, last year I was an idiot for picking TCU to beat them. But this year I've been pretty objective with Georgia, I feel like, from the beginning. And there's a reason I had them winning out in the preseason. The SEC is good. Georgia's schedule, I think, is stronger than I expected it to be in the preseason, but still overall weak in the grand scheme of things. They're a really good football team. Like, I think they're top 5. I think they're the closest to a playoff lock in the country right now, given that Michigan has to play Penn State and Ohio State, who I think are top 10. No one except for maybe Ole Miss is top 10 on Georgia's schedule, and Ole Miss has to travel to Sanford. And personally, I don't trust Ole Miss yet as top 10, but if they like crush A&M, then that's probably a given. Like, okay, they're beginning to really ramp it up here, especially in a look-ahead spot. These picks, I think, are understandable, and I actually think they're pretty solid. They're logical in the sense that it looks like the Pac-12 cannibalizes itself. Big Ten champion gets in. Michigan likely, but if it's Ohio State, then it's Ohio State. Florida State, right now I'd say they're a lock to be 12-1, probably 13-0 too. No one in their conference compares to Florida State. And then Georgia at number 1. I have them as the 1 seed just because of reputation, B, they are going to wreck a lot of these upcoming opponents. I think they're going to dominate whoever's in the SEC championship game. My pick with LSU beating Bama, in my mind, implies it's going to be LSU, in my mind. Georgia would. I mean, Georgia has a near elite offense. I mean, they have a near elite offense, a near elite to elite defense. LSU's totally one dimensional. That's a recipe for Georgia to just wear them down. And Alabama, Georgia's strength is their passing defense. Alabama can't run the football. They only get points with deep shots. I just think Georgia, and you and I disagree on this, and we'll just have to see who's right. Because I think that Georgia will get into the playoff, so we'll get to test our theories. I just think it's really hard to three-peat. And I watch Georgia this season, and they do just look different. You've said this too, but I think you and I just disagree on how different they look. You think they've only regressed a tad bit, or maybe a small amount, a significant amount, but they're still better than everyone else. I think they've regressed, and Oregon's gotten better, Michigan's gotten better. A lot of these teams that last year were playoff contenders at some point have gotten much better. But that's just my opinion. I think that, look, I wouldn't pick Texas to beat Georgia. There are only two teams I would confidently pick. Actually, well, no, two, because Washington's very boomer bust. I'd have to think about that, even though I'd lean Washington. I would pick Michigan and Oregon to beat Georgia. I think Ohio State, as much as they matched up extremely well with Georgia last year, and I would have picked Ohio State more times than not with hindsight to beat that Georgia team, I feel like this year it's the opposite. I feel like this year overall Ohio State's at a similar level, maybe slightly better, but Ohio State can't run the football consistently. And Carson Beck's a better quarterback than Kyle McCord at this point. I mean, he is better, or at least more consistent. Ohio State is the better defense, but I would be very 50-50 with that game. So if Texas faced off against Georgia, I'd pick Georgia. If Michigan faced off against Florida State, we have an identical Rose Bowl matchup. I would pick Michigan to win. And
I'll say this.
Yeah.
Georgia's the only team that I think gets in with one loss if it occurs in the conference championship. I think outside of them, and this loss has to occur in the conference championship to them or something like that. They're the only team that really has any margin for error because their November stretch is so tough. It's like they're still going to be able to get in. It's just Michigan can afford that because it's so late in the season, and it's like a loss to Penn State or Ohio State would get in, or Penn State would get in. I don't know how they would do it, but you could only put in one team because you put in two teams. It's like you're going to have to bump over somebody who's deserving of being in there. Like if FSU has one loss, they're done. They're out of all the teams that can afford one loss, Florida State and Michigan are up there. And Ohio State, they can't afford one loss because if they lose the Michigan, they're not getting into the Big Ten championship game.
Yeah. And
so it's kind of it's really tricky how this thing is going to work. And if Bama wins and they beat Georgia and they only got one loss, and that's the Texas, are you going to disinclude them?
Yeah. The SEC is weird because the SEC, I think, is the conference with perhaps the widest range of outcomes. They could get two teams in the playoff, and if all hell breaks loose, they could also miss the playoff with how deep everyone's schedule is. That's going to be the beauty of the SEC this November. You could get two teams in, or you could have no one in. Thank you for coming on. I think, it being 8:12 p.m., we've been on here for over an hour, 30 minutes. It's always very fun to have you on and talk. We're going to answer the chat, and then we're going to close out. Music for Me 007 responding to an earlier comment about sleeping on Missouri from another user. He said they ain't going into Athens and winning that game. I'm in full agreement with you. If Mizzou wins this game and you're Georgia and you're like, let's say the gym goer wearing the headphones, you flip the headphones off and you leave because you are done if you lose to Mizzou at home. That might be an over-exaggeration, but you lose to Mizzou on your own home stadium, you're toast. I mean, you are burnt toast.
Well, I want to say they're done because let's say they lose to Mizzou and they win out. Let's say because if Michigan goes undefeated, they're number 1, and if FSU goes undefeated, they're number 2, and then you got a bunch of one-loss teams. You got Georgia, you got Texas, you got potentially Washington. Let's say Washington has one loss. Then you got the argument between Washington, Oregon, Georgia, Texas. Like,
yeah.
And hell, let's say Alabama wins it. Alabama wins the SEC. But what if LSU wins it? I don't think they'll put a 2-loss team in.
I don't think
you
so
feel me?
either.
But it's just like, there's going to be, like, if Georgia loses, like, it has to be in the SEC championship. Because by that point, like, their schedule with their last 3 games being Mizzou, Ole Miss, Tennessee, as long as Tennessee can be ranked and them beating Tennessee on the road, like,
yeah,
it can only occur in the SEC championship because you're losing to Bama. And based on what's happened in the past, like, they don't knock you if you lose. Like, it's happened to Georgia in the past. Like, they lost to Bama in the SEC championship game out of nowhere, and they still got put in. So it's just like,
yeah. Mizzou's just intriguing because, like, 12-1 Georgia, maybe you beat Alabama or LSU, but you have that ugly home loss, and then, you know, let's say Oregon or Texas are also 12-1, and they're sitting over there like saying, well, we lost earlier and we lost to better teams and we beat good teams. So the beauty of this season is total chaos can just come out of nowhere. Last few comments that we're going to answer. SFS inverted. Sam, I love you, bro, but I got to root for my team. Well, hey, go Buckeyes until November 25th, and then it's all go Wolverines. I want that undefeated matchup, and I want it to be number 1 versus number 2, which means that Georgia will have to lose, and I don't think that'll happen, but a man can dream.
Like, there is a good – I'm not saying Georgia's invincible. All I'm saying is, like, based on what we've seen out of Georgia in the regular season, like, these boys are dogs anytime they get in a big game. Like, they're ready, but, like, there is a chance they win. Like, there's no, like, superiorly talented team that you just look at and be like, yeah, like, right now they're the clear-cut favorite. Like, when Michigan beats Penn State, my tune with Michigan will change. You feel me? Like, then I'll say they're the best team in college football. It's just right now, like, until they can beat somebody like that, I just got them at number 2. But I got respect to them. You feel me? They're a good squad. Like, they definitely could beat Georgia. I'm not saying that they don't have a chance. I'm just saying until I see it, you feel me, I still got to stick with – well, I had Ohio State saying they should be number 1 based on resume.
Yeah. Oh, they should be. That's why I have them at number 2. And I think they're clutch, and I think they have a very high ceiling still. For me,
I got them over Georgia.
Yeah, exactly. And they should have been number 1. If your whole point is to rank teams based off of strength of record, Ohio State has to be number 1 right now. There's no other option. In terms of just raw, who I think would beat who right now, I think it would probably go like 1 Michigan, 2 Oregon. I think Oregon's loss now is just a total fluke. I mean, I think they rematch with Washington, and that's a win. And then I'd say probably like 3 Ohio State. I would love to say 4 Washington, but I think Georgia's just more talented, more consistent. I just think Washington has the better resume, so that's why I have them at 4th in my poll. But I'd say top 4 just from like who on a neutral field would be 1 Michigan, 2 Oregon, 3 OSU, 4 Georgia. And there's an argument for Georgia to be 1, for Oregon to be 1. I have a hard time seeing Ohio State being the best team in college football on a, like eye test basis, but they have the best resume. So there's that. Well, thank you all for being on here. Thank you, JT Sports, being on here. One more question by Husker Chuck, then we'll get off. What if Michigan, Florida State, and Oregon run the table and Alabama beats Georgia in the SEC championship game? Who gets in? Let's just answer with the 4 teams and be done. Michigan, Florida State, and Oregon, if they run the table, they're all getting in. Alabama beats Georgia in the SEC championship game. Alabama, a 12-1 Alabama gets in over a 12-1 Georgia, and Georgia fans would be irate at the fact that they're left out. But that would be, that'd be the rules, and you'd still get an SEC team in. It would just be Bama. They'd probably be the 3 seed ahead of the 4 seed Oregon.
Yeah, like I would agree with that because it's not like Alabama hasn't had any quality wins. Like they beat Ole Miss, like they beat Tennessee. They would have beaten LSU too, hypothetically. It's like, and if you beat Georgia, like only one, like I don't think there's going to be a single conference that can get 2 teams in. Like I really think it'll be one, and it wouldn't be because Georgia. It'll just be because like I don't know. It'll be weird. Like Georgia would have to lose in the SEC championship game, and the other teams wouldn't have to win out. But if Washington wins out, let's talk about that. Like, what if Washington wins out? Because realistically, they're still undefeated right now.
Yes.
Right? If they win out, Georgia has no room for error. You feel me?
Oh,
but
yeah.
I do think that if USC doesn't beat Washington, I think they're at least going to get one over Washington or Oregon because the talent is still there, even with how porous the defense is. Like they show they can go toe to toe with anybody if you get Caleb Williams time to throw.
Yeah, I don't think Georgia can afford to lose in the SEC title game based off of what we know right now. But that could change. Oregon, I think they'd blow USC out, but Oregon State's a rival, and they have to play in the Pac-12 championship game, so they're upset. The upset month of November is upon us. Let's prepare for an awesome season of college football. All right, everyone. Thank you for being on. Thank you, JT Sports, for being on. Have a great night, everyone. And college football is tomorrow. I cannot wait to see what the results are going to be.